I'm here in San Francisco. So I'll just start out with a kind of overview of what I think of as a framework. I really think of Bright Spots and Landmines as a framework for decision making and figuring out what's working and not working and how to change things. And I'll just give a little bit, some different flavors of that I've kind of come to appreciate over time in terms of how to explain it. So I thought we might take a second. If you look at this CGM trace, 24 hours of data, I'm curious what you think. Just think to yourself, like, what's the story behind these 24 hours of diabetes? Like, what is there to be learned from what happened on this day? What if you had to kind of generate a story of, waking up at 7 a.m. and eating breakfast and eating lunch and going about my day and dinner and then sleep? Like, what are some of the things that you think happened on this day that are lessons to be learned, that things that could be changed? And I'd invite you to just kind of generate a little story for yourself in terms of what you think happened. And I think a lot of us with diabetes are very good at this sort of diabetes landmines thinking, which is to say, like, we make a mistake, our blood sugar goes through the roof or drops down super low, and it's like stepping on a landmine. And so this approach is to say, like, what are the mistakes I'm making and how can I fix them? And we're all really, I think, trained to do this, especially with CGM, because CGM is really a landmine detection device. It tells you when you go high or low and alerts you to that fact. And so when I think of diabetes landmines, it's, what are these decisions that explode into these really high and low blood sugars? What are those, if it is a challenging day with diabetes, like what made that day challenging? What are the choices I regret? What are the negative feelings? And I think what's important is to always take action on these things. So if there's a pattern of diabetes landmines, like, how can I have fewer of those things happen each day? And I think most of us are pretty familiar with this way of thinking. And what I think is super interesting about the same CGM plot that I showed earlier is I wonder if anyone generated a story of bright spots, because actually, like, this was a pretty solid day of diabetes with one kind of blip in the middle. But there are almost, looks like about 21 hours of in-range blood sugars in the kind of 70 to 140 range. And bright spots are really easy to miss. And I think that's what makes them such a, how I try to remind myself of that constantly. And also remember that if I'm not looking for them, I might miss them. And so bright spots thinking is a little bit different. It's about saying, what's going well in my diabetes that I should keep doing? What should I double down on? When I do have a good day where blood sugars are in range, like, what enabled that? What decisions, what foods, what habits did I engage in that made that happen? What put me in a positive frame of mind in terms of mental state? And then, the follow-up question is always like, how can I have more of that stuff happen more consistently each day? And so what's interesting about this same plot that I showed is, so the average blood sugar on this day was 117. The time in range was 87%. I took a 2-hour bike ride. This spike, I think, was actually from some mix of like adrenaline from riding my bike, maybe some infusion set stuff going on. But I ate, I took action on my CGM data. I stuck to the eating plan that I share in Bright Spots and Landmines. I often try to wait to eat until my blood sugar is dropping. I got enough sleep. I even meditated in the morning. I mean, this was a day filled with bright spots, despite like one blip in the middle of the day that, frankly, in retrospect, like, I have a hard time explaining why that happened. But I think this plot is sort of a useful anchor point for these two ways of thinking about our diabetes and how we kind of weight one versus the other. So I think diabetes can often feel a lot like this. The landmines loom large, and we we can't even see the bright spots, or they seem so unimportant in the face of the things that we're messing up and doing wrong. And so one hope is that we can kind of shift to at least a more equal balance, where we're kind of finding the things that are working and noticing that and trying to replicate those things, and also taking action on some of the things that aren't working. And then maybe over time, like you find a system that works for you and that you can do and repeat, and the bright spots actually start to outweigh the landmines. And I think that's something I tried to share in the book very deliberately. So this is another way that I've been thinking about bright spots and landmines as a concept. It's more of a time and range framing of it, but some of you might find this helpful. I'm a very graphical person, and so this is how I think about it. I often think about type 1 diabetes as, the goal is to keep my car on the road. Keeping my blood sugar in range is when I feel the best, and what I'm trying to do every day with diabetes. And so, I got my little diabetes self here, and on the road is in range. Let's call that 70 to 180 for now. And way off out here in the desert is really low blood sugars and really high blood sugars. And so bright spots are about asking, what are the things that keep me on the road, and how can I do more of that stuff? So what are the foods? What are the mental mindset, psychology habits? What is the exercise habits that allow me to stay on the road? What sleep habits help me stay on the road? And how can I do more of that stuff? And an interesting question, taking this road analogy, is what allows me to be in cruise control? So how can I stay on the road and actually do so with less effort? And so I'm really interested in strategies that let me do that. I want to be on the road with less effort. So that's sort of another piece of bright spots. And then when it comes to landmines, we're thinking about, okay, what are the things that drive me off road? And can I prevent those things from even happening and occurring? And when they inevitably do happen, how can I recover quickly so I kind of get my car back on the road instead of driving off road in the desert? And similarly, I'm interested in what causes extreme off-roading. So when I'm way out, driving over there, way out in the desert, over near the mountains, and I'm hitting 250 and higher, how can I prevent that kind of extreme off-roading? And so I've been thinking about this as how can I build some guardrails? In essence, how can I prevent myself from getting way out into those really extreme blood sugars, so that I'm kind of staying a little bit closer to the road, to the lines on the road? So that's kind of bright spots and landmines in a sort of time and range context. What are the things that keep me on the road? How can I do more of that stuff? What are the things that drive me off road? How can I recover when they occur? And in the future, how can I build some guardrails so that I don't get out into those extreme blood sugars? Okay. So I don't know, that's kind of a different framing than the one I share in the book, but I think it's kind of a fun one. And then over time, once you have found a system that works for you of habits and strategies, a hope is to maybe learn to drive on a tighter road. So instead of driving on a road that's 70 to 180, it's actually still, you find habits and strategies that allow you to kind of stay in the 70 to 140 range, for instance. And that's something I've I think tried to develop over time as well. And I think a really big key to all of this is CGM. And I've been thinking of CGM as biology has the microscope, astronomy has telescopes. I mean, in diabetes, CGM is our telescope. It is our microscope. It tells us what's going on. And for those not on CGM, blood glucose monitoring is this thing. And there's this really there's a show about Einstein called Genius. So this quote is in that show, and I think it really applies to this. It's this idea that tools don't make discoveries, people do. And this to me is all about CGM. It's this need to, CGM is a tool, but it's up to us as people to make discoveries about what's going on. And I think of bright spots and landmines as this sort of discovery process of what's working and not working, and what can be done differently. I don't know if Einstein actually said this, so that's why I have it quoted from the actual show. So anyways, so the book has 43 bright spots and 16 landmines. And you'll notice like that's a pretty different ratio. And that's intentional because, you know, it's so easy to forget about the bright spots that are occurring that I really wanted to share those that seem to repeatedly work. So I'll just go through some of my favorite ones in these different areas of the book, and then we'll open it up for questions. And so I will just jump right in. Um, you know, I think it sounded like there were a lot of questions folks were asking about food and different diets. And my perspective is we all have a tool in CGM to kind of test and iterate and figure out what foods and diets work for us. So I am not of the belief that it is a good use of our time to be like vigorously and sometimes meanly debating like whose diet is best or better. It's more about like I'm a fan of personalizing nutrition. So, you know, each of us has different life circumstances, different cultures. We live in different places. We have different socioeconomic means. Like we all have a different series of foods that we're willing and able to eat. And so CGM is a tool that allows us to figure that out. Um, I'll say that, you know, when I was diagnosed, we were told you could eat whatever you want as long as you take insulin for it. And for, you know, that was in 2001 where there wasn't CGM. And I think that was unfortunate advice because the first thing it led to was a lot of off road extreme blood sugars all the time. And no real good way to recognize them without taking 12 finger sticks a day, which no teenager is going to do for the most part. And the other thing that leads to is like a lot more effort because you're always, it's more work to drive off road than it is to kind of stay in the middle of the road. And so chasing the highs and the lows all the time is very exhausting. And what I kind of figured out once I got on CGM and started testing different diets and nutritions is like, I just want a way of eating that lets me be in cruise control. Like I want to be on the road with less effort. And the way I frame this in the book is eat less than 30 grams of carbohydrates at one time. Um, that I think that's in some sense an arbitrary number. Like why 30 and not 31 or 29? I mean, there isn't a good reason other than that it's a round number. And I think what I like about this framing is that it's the amount at one time. So if we think of like every meal is like turning the steering wheel, if I'm only eating 30 grams at a time or less, it's just a lighter move of the steering wheel than, you know, if I'm eating 200 grams of carbs at one time. And that's kind of what I'm interested in is like, how can I make this disease less work? And so that's why I do it. This is okay. I want to preface this by saying, like, I'm going to share a couple slides of my own CGM data, and I have really mixed feelings about doing this. On the one hand, I am naturally a skeptical person when I hear things promulgated, and so I want to see evidence that it works. And so this is my attempt to say, like, this is the evidence to me that I'm using to continue doing the things that I'm talking about. On the other hand, there's a lot of like comparison with diabetes numbers and data, and I think that can be very destructive, especially if someone is in a place where they're struggling and they're seeing like, you know, lots of other people talking about how great they're doing. That can be very isolating and demeaning, and so I actually have really mixed feelings about sharing this, but I want to preface it with that. Um, I pulled this last night. These are my past 90 days. And I think what's important is like, I eat the same way that I share in Bright Spots and Landmines still. And I think what's valuable about it is that it does enable a lot of time on the road. And it does require less effort. And it also important, like the extreme blood sugars are pretty rare. And that I find really helpful for helping me like sustain this way of eating. And like I said before, I don't believe this is the only way of eating or being able to manage type 1 diabetes well. It's just the way that seems to work for me. And this is the AGP of that, and I think it just tells a similar story. So this is all the past 90 days crunched into one 24-hour plot, and you'll notice how tight it gets overnight, and that's because I wear loop, and so that helps like really tighten things overnight, like a closed loop system. Um, Interestingly, wearing a closed loop system has not changed my time in 70 to 180, but it's really tightened my time in
Te lo mando.
30.
I need to finish up.
What's that? Oh, okay. So yeah, I just think this is just another way of saying like you know, this way of eating kind of enables in-range blood sugars that with less effort, and that's what I care about. And then this is just 6 years of time in range data kind of plotted. This is now 70 to 180, just plotted over 6 years of time. Each bar is a month. And I show this just to suggest that this feels pretty sustainable at this point, and it seems to like prompt similar outcomes. And that's why I talk about it and why I keep doing it. And then the next obvious question is like, okay, less than 30 grams of at one time, what do you eat? And I think it tends to be very kind of Mediterranean, low carb. I'm not quite keto. So, I do a lot of veggies, I do a lot of nuts, I do a lot of almond flour. This is an almond flour pizza that's really easy to make. These are almond flour waffles that take only 7 minutes to make. I try to replace potatoes and pasta and rice and just things that are hard to bolus for with veggies. This is chia pudding, which I talk a lot about in the book. I don't eat as much chia pudding now as I used to. I don't eat breakfast a lot now, interestingly enough, but it is a good snack and a helpful thing to eat. These are low carb tortillas that I get a lot that are awesome for making, fajitas and tacos and stuff, big salads, riced cauliflower, riced broccoli. The low carb community, I think, has done a really good job of like innovating recipes and things that replicate the kind of carblicious food that all of us love, but that are also really that are easier to bolus for. Um, this is sort of a twofer. So filling half my plate with vegetables is something I try to do a lot, especially at lunch and dinner. This plate on the left here is actually from Disneyland, and I share that because it's a reminder that like even in the heart of fast food, it's possible to order in such a way that it kind of enables more bright spots to happen. Getting salad instead of potatoes, when you're ordering an omelet, just kind of filling the plate with vegetables. And it's easy to bolus for these things. It's like 1 unit for me, or maybe like 2 units if it's a really big meal. And that's what I like about it is it's really simple. Um, okay, so maybe an example of a diabetes landmine for folks who aren't as familiar with this concept, and I think all of us struggle with this, is when you're low, you want to eat everything in sight. And then, of course, you go super high. Or when I'm low, sometimes I'm like, well, I'm low anyway, so I can treat myself because I'm low, and that's okay. And so this example on the left is one I share in the book. It's from a few years ago. I had a roommate who worked at a tech company, and they got a lot of free food and would bring this free food home to us roommates and put it in the fridge. And there was this huge, enormous bowl of granola in the middle of the fridge, like, oh, right when you open the fridge door. And so, you can see I went to bed at around a blood sugar of 95, woke up at in the 50s, went downstairs, opened the fridge, woo, had a few handfuls of granola and went back to bed. And I only had a little bit of granola. I promise you, I only had a little bit. And of course, I spiked really high, stayed high all night, woke up the next morning high. And then, of course, half of my day was consumed with trying to get my blood sugar down to 265. So, how do we build guardrails to avoid this problem? These are some of the guardrails that work for me. having go to automatic low corrections. So when I'm low, I eat blank. And it's just like an if then thing. It's automatic. And I think it's helpful to have things that are quantity limited. So there's none of this like pouring it out of the container into the hand, shoveling it down, and then doing the same thing like 7 more times. So I like, and things that are not that appealing to overeat, because when I'm low, I'm going to overeat something that's super tasty. And then the second thing I think about is finding my dose of carbohydrates. So, what is the dose of carbs I need to get back to target? So, for me, one glucose tab raises me 20 points, and I just know that's what my pattern is. So, if I'm at 60, I need 2 tabs to get back to 100. If I'm at 60 and dropping, I need 3 tabs to get back to target, probably. I also use this before exercise. So let's say my blood sugar is at 100, and I know there were a lot of questions about how to avoid lows during exercise. This is how I do it. I use fast-acting carbs that I know exactly how much they'll raise my blood sugar, and then I can eat them around the time of exercise to get my blood sugar up to a point with some more precision than just eating random things. So if I'm at 100 and I'm about to go on a bike ride, I know a 1 hour bike ride is going to drop me at least 60 points. So I need 3 tabs, like right before I walk out the door, if I'm at 100, to kind of float myself back down into target. And then as I'm riding, if I check my CGM and I'm low, like I'll just eat more tabs on the spot. And that sort of like micro dosing of glucose tabs is actually how I kind of deal with exercise now. And that's this idea of like dosing carbs more precisely to correct lows. So that's a way of building guardrails, and I think it's a helpful example. Just a couple other food examples, and then I should probably speed up a little bit, if that's even possible. One of the things that I don't think I knew enough about was food scheduling and timing. And so, one way to think about food is like, how much am I eating at one time? Like, am I eating 30 grams of carbs at one time or 15? But another way to think about food is on the time axis. So, like, when am I eating throughout the day? Like, when is my biggest meal? When is my smallest meal? And one of the things I started to discover is that if I eat a huge dinner late at night, even if it's low carb, this is often the result. And I discovered that like dinner is the meal that I want to be probably the lightest if possible, or at least the second lightest, maybe if breakfast is kind of light. But eating a huge heavy dinner late at night is just a way to have high blood sugars all night and also feel exhausted. So the way I frame this in the book is eat an early dinner more than 3 hours before bedtime and don't snack afterwards. Now I just kind of frame this as make dinner the last food intake of the day. And, I know this can be really tough, especially if it's just natural to kind of snack at night. Um, but if we're all kind of at home during COVID right now, anyways, it's hard to even like take a walk after dinner sometimes. So this can be really this can be really helpful, especially if you're on a closed loop system or you have CGM. You can at least kind of see your patterns so that you're not over basalized at night. Because if you're used to having a snack right before bed every night, and then you just all of a sudden switch and make dinner the last meal of the day, like your insulin regimen might need to change. But this for me has been really helpful for improving time and range overnight, sleeping better, and waking up feeling more rested and having more in target to start the day. Just some other things that I'm using more. I make almond flour waffles a lot now. They only take 7 minutes, and they taste pretty good. I think kiddos would like these a lot. The recipe is at this link, diatribe.org/waffles. There's also a pancake recipe that's kind of similar, diatribe.org/pancakes. And this is actually almond flour bagels that I really like making. I think that one is just try diatribe.org/bagels. And you can also make bread. I mean, there's just so many recipes out there for this stuff. And almond flour is great because it has like 5 grams of carbs and in a serving or something like that, and 3 of them are fiber. So it's very low impact in terms of blood sugar, and you can still make baked goods that are at least more approximate some of the like delicious white flour stuff that certainly that I ate as a teenager, but that was impossible to bolus for. And then this is, I think, the last in the food section here. I've been using these. They're called shirataki noodles. They're 100% fiber, like 2 or 3 grams of fiber in this pack. And it's like a good 1 serving of pasta. And we've been making pasta and ramen with these. So my partner and I will make like a bolognese sauce, which takes like an hour or two. And then she'll make her pasta and I'll just make my own thing of skinny noodles. And you just boil these for 2 minutes, and then they're good to go right in a soup. Or you can like actually boil them and then like pan fry them. But these are great. They have no impact on blood sugar, and it's allowed me to have things like ramen and homemade pasta and things that I just stopped eating when I was kind of a more intense low carb person. And these are low carb, so I wish I had discovered these earlier. And then this is just the last one. These tortillas I really like. They're pretty tasty. They're very low carb, almost no impact on blood sugar, and I'm a big fan of them. I'm gonna skip that. Okay, how are we doing on time? We're like 35-ish in.
Yep, you're doing.
Okay. Cool. Why don't I spend 10 minutes on mindset and then we'll do questions? Does that work?
That sounds great.
Okay. I mean, mindset is something I spend a lot of time thinking about because I'm learning how to be a therapist and help people with their mental health and behavioral health. And so it's probably the thing that I spend the most time thinking about nowadays. And, I think for those of us wearing CGM, it's very easy for the numbers to take on this added meaning or produce this added anxiety of, curse words. I can't believe my blood sugar's high, rage bolus. So, I'm 235. I am taking 10 units to get this down. Or feeling like, I'm so bad at this, even though I'm working really hard. And to me, the single greatest antidote to this is remembering this graphic, which is the bonkers complexity that those of us with diabetes have to deal with every single day. And, this is a list of at least 42 things that affect blood glucose. I think this is incomplete. I mean, it's probably more like 60 or 100 when you take into account like all the broader stuff that affects your mental health, which of course affects how you show up and manage your diabetes. But I just think what's so crazy about some of these things is that most of these factors you can't even measure. There's no way to know if, trying to think of an example, like, is this an infusion set issue or am I just really stressed today? So it's really frustrating. And I know for women, like periods is a whole nightmare in terms of blood sugars at that time of the month. And some of these things like exercise, I mean, sometimes high intensity exercise will blast your blood sugar through the roof, and sometimes it will plummet like crazy. It could be the same activity for the same amount of time. And this, I think, is what's so frustrating about diabetes, is that you can do the same thing 2 days in the same week and get completely different results. And my opinion is it's because of all of the variables that affect our day-to-day life with diabetes. And you don't know, you can't measure all these things. You definitely can't control all these things. And you don't know what's in play at any given time. So this gets back to that idea of like responding to diabetes landmines when they occur. Like, how can I recover? How can I get back on the road? Is there anything to learn from this? There might not be. Rather than, I can't believe I'm high again. Because it's sort of inevitable that it will happen, just given all of the biological variables that we deal with. All the quality, like the tools that we have are amazing and they have improved so much. And yet they're still not perfect. You know, infusion sites still fail. You know, scar tissue builds up where we have infusion sites. Insulin goes bad. Even in the fridge, it can go bad. There's just so many variables that unpredictability is the only predictable thing in diabetes. And I think that's just something I try to remind myself over and over when I feel frustrated. And of course, this is a marathon. So, you know, it's not like we can give up type 1 diabetes tomorrow as much as we all want to. If you want this poster, you can download it for free at this link, diatribe.org/42 factors poster. And there's a whole PDF that explains each factor in detail. And that's at this link, /42 factors explained. Another analogy to think about this is like every day with diabetes is like a complicated stereo system with 42 knobs. And, you know, there's the combined output of the knobs, you know, is the sound quality. Like in this metaphor, like that's what your blood sugar is. However, every day the knobs completely reset. Like all the settings are like completely wonky. And you have to like tinker and figure out like what right mix of settings is happening. And you don't have access to all the knobs. So some days, some knobs are just going to be locked out because you can't do anything about that particular variable. And you just have to accept and cope and deal with that. And that's like just ridiculous that we have to do this every day. And it really takes the pressure and perfectionism off for me to at least remember this thing. So that kind of leads into what I think is potentially one of the most important diabetes bright spots in this mindset category, which is blood sugar numbers are neutral information to make decisions. They're not good or bad. They're not grades. They're not tests. They're not evaluations of how well or poorly we're doing. They're data to help us make decisions, understand patterns, uncover what's going on. Sometimes I think of it like the number on my CGM is like a speedometer, like how fast or slow am I going? Or, you know, imagine a pilot flying a plane from San Francisco to Tokyo, and the pilot looks at the instrument panel in the cockpit and says like, oh my gosh, the plane is flying way off course. Like, you know, turns to the co-pilot and says like, I can't believe what a terrible pilot I am. I can't believe I've let this happen again. I did everything right. And no pilot would do that, right? They would look at the instrument panel and say, oh, the plane is off course. Let's turn it back to the direction that we want to be going. And that's, I think, a helpful analogy as I think about how I want to use CGM and take some of the judgment and self-blame off of the numbers. This is just yet another level of complexity. So in some of the work I'm doing, learning about mental health, there's a big concept, especially in family therapy, of circular causality. Like one thing causes another thing, and that second thing causes more of the first thing to happen, which causes more of the second thing to happen. And you get this repeating cycle where families often get stuck. So, you know, if I have a teenager and I nag my teenager to check their blood sugar, and the teenager is like, I'm not going to do that. And they just won't check their blood sugar anymore, which causes further nagging, which causes further distancing. And in mental health, that's called a pursuer-distancer cycle. And there are all kinds of cycles like these that happen. But this is one, of course, the animation won't work in this view, but this is one I just wanted to share, which is, you know, let's say I have some caffeine, like I'm really tired, you know, late in the day, I want to have some caffeine. That helps me get through the end of the day. But unfortunately, like that makes it really hard for me to fall asleep because of the way that caffeine operates. It actually competes for those same receptors that actually trigger that sleepiness signal. So that makes it hard to fall asleep. And then I don't sleep as well. And then I wake up the next day and I feel really stressed. And I also feel tired. And that stress and tiredness makes me not want to exercise. Unfortunately, exercise is one of the things that like lifts my mood and actually helps me feel energetic, like in the afternoon. So that prompts me, because I don't have the energy to exercise, to have more caffeine. And that repeats the cycle. And you can just see like, this is just a super simple, like 4 variables in a row, but you can see how like very quickly things can just kind of flow in circular causality that make this disease so challenging to live with. And I think that's just important to recognize. And then the other piece, this is a fun graphic of just remembering like our blood sugars affect our mood. And so, especially for teenagers, I was always told like avoid, manage your diabetes or else you're going to have long-term complications. I mean, that does not mean anything to me as a teenager because teenagers don't think in terms of like 30-year time horizons. But what probably would have mattered is manage your diabetes because your blood sugar will be more in range and you'll be able to do things that are important to you much better. So, I was a big time athlete when I was a teenager. So like if I had known that, keeping my blood sugar in range would have given me more energy and made me a better basketball player or made me, helped me focus and do a little bit better in school or be less stressed, like I would have been into that stuff. And so I think connecting blood sugars to things that matter today, things that are important to someone with diabetes is really, really vital rather than, manage this or else you're going to have long-term complications. I'm not sure that most teenagers would respond to that. Maybe some would, but I certainly didn't when I was that age. Yeah, and this is just a reminder of this. Again, I don't know why I put that there. So 4:15, this may be a good stopping point. I can hit these real quick. Walking after meals, really helpful way to lower blood sugar, works almost every time. All or nothing mentality. Well, I don't have an hour, so I can't exercise. It's very easy to kind of, when you start looking, in mental health, this is called black and white thinking. And when you start looking for this in your own thoughts and habits, like I find it everywhere in my life where I'm using like some kind of black and white thinking to say like, well, I don't have an hour, so I can't exercise. It's all or nothing. And my antidote to that is 5 minutes beats 0 minutes. Can I do 5? If I can do 5, I'm better than 0. And 0 is what I would do if I'm in all or nothing mentality. So trying to chunk it down to something that feels really manageable. And I think this is super important during COVID because literally everything is harder right now. So chunking things down into the smallest possible thing is really helpful. This is just a graphical way for those who are graphical to remember, like black and white thinking, all or nothing. And I think life and diabetes is very checkered. And it's not just black and white, there's blue and orange and green and yellow and gray, and it's all over the place. So things are rarely black and white, and seeing everything outside of that can be a helpful way to kind of get out of that pattern. And sleep, I'll just say that it's important. And I think this was the book that really changed my thinking. I thought sleep was important, but kind of sort of important. But I think it's just as important as food to be. I mean, it's probably just as important as food because it influences how much we eat and what we want to eat and how we metabolize. And it influences everything in diabetes. And so I think sleep is really critical. And of course, this is why like closed loop systems are so awesome because they keep blood sugar in range overnight and that makes it easier to sleep. Okay. That's the link for the book. It's free. I don't make a dime off of it. It's all for the good of the community. And that is where you can get it. It's also on Amazon and it's priced at cost on Amazon. So there's no profit there. All right.
Adam, that was amazing. Thank you so much. And you did great on time, which is even better. We have a lot of questions in the chat. I just wanted to start with some overall themes that I think you can hit that most people want to hear about, and then we'll kind of get to some more specific questions. If you have questions, please make sure you're putting them in the chat and we'll get to all of them. One of the biggest questions that people had is around weight loss with type 1 and with diabetes in general. It seems to get harder because you're feeding insulin and those kinds of things. Can you talk a little bit about weight loss management system, like how best to go about all of those pieces, Adam?
Yeah, I'm pausing because I'm pausing because I'm not an expert on this, so I want to be thoughtful about how I respond to this. Yeah, I think it can be I think with type 1, because of lows, it can be easy to like want to eat to your insulin regimen. And I think a lot of us get in that trap, and it should be the opposite. Like my insulin regimen should fit how I want to eat. And one of the interesting things for me was when I started on the loop system, and I don't mean to make this all about how great closed loop is, but I found that I was less tethered to eating, meaning I was like less handcuffed to like eating every 3 hours, and I could like go longer periods of time without feeling like I had to eat, because I knew that my pump would be suspended if I was starting to dip low. And that actually helped me like back up from eating constantly to avoid lows. So that was really helpful. So if you're interested in weight loss and haven't considered closed loop and have access to it, that could be an option that I would recommend. There are some off-label medications that seem to help some people with weight loss, like a GLP-1 agonist, not approved for type 1, but people seem to lose weight on it, reduce their insulin doses, like a liraglutide or Ozempic, Victoza. What's the Lilly one? Trulicity. Some folks with type 1 take those. It is off-label, so you need a provider to kind of help around that. Some folks also lose weight a little bit on an SGLT2 inhibitor, which is a type 2 diabetes medication also not approved for type 1. And then I've heard of folks taking metformin and actually getting a little bit of weight loss with type 1. So, and JDRF sponsored a big trial of that, actually. As far as dietary strategies, I feel like it's trial and error. One thing I do now, I try to eat all of my food within like an 8-hour period, 8 to 10 hours. So when I get up in the morning, I don't eat until I'm hungry. And often that's not until 10 or 11 a.m. And then I make dinner my last meal of the day. And that's actually like reduced the amount I eat. I've also lost a little bit of weight, and I seem to have higher time in range with that. So yeah, I wish, hopefully that's some helpful nuggets, but yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, great. The other piece that people seem, and I think this fits very well with the mental health part, is the fear, anxiety, and burnout, especially with COVID and all the pressure of COVID, and then feeling the pressure to maintain your blood sugars and constantly do those pieces. So can you talk a little bit about how you can kind of manage those times where diabetes feels so overwhelming that you just kind of burn out and then decide not to do anything? So how can you keep your car on the road rather than keep falling off?
Thank you for remembering that analogy. So I've been reading a bit about self-compassion. There's a really good book by Kristen Neff, Neff. It's called Self-Compassion. She also has a workbook. And it's this idea of like treating ourselves with the kindness that a friend would treat us. And the whole thesis is like, most of us are really crummy and critical and judgmental and rotten to ourselves. Whereas if a friend was in the room, like what would that friend say to us? And how would they treat us? And if there was ever a time for self-compassion, it is right now. Because everything is harder. I honestly don't even track my steps anymore. I haven't done it in a year. You know, that's just where I'm at. And like wherever you are is totally perfectly okay. And honestly, I think that's the biggest thing, is like accepting that things may not be where you want them at right now, and this just may not be a time for that. Like things may just not be accessible. In one of my favorite types of therapy called DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, there's this tension between acceptance and change. And I feel like a lot of us with diabetes are like, oh, I got to change all these things. I got to change all these things. And sometimes like acceptance is actually like the most important thing right now. Like I'm accepting that COVID is the way it is. I'm accepting that I can't do these 10 things. I can't even go to the grocery store. Like we order groceries. Because this is just not a time for change right now. So other things like I actually use exercise as my own mental health tool. So like riding my bike is probably the biggest way I manage my own like stress and anxiety. There's a really good app called Mood Meter, Moodmeter. It was developed by the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence or emotional study of emotions. And it's a way of like adding a little more precision to like, oh, how are you feeling? I'm okay, or I'm good. I'm hanging in. And it has like 60 different emotions, and it plots them on a 2x2 axis of like energy and pleasantness. And it's helped me figure out like, oh, I am feeling really anxious right now. And then it prompts you to consider like, was there anything that happened in the last, few minutes that led to that anxious emotion? And it's given me a little bit more awareness and space of that, and that's been helpful. And then the last thing is I've just doubled down on like mindfulness. Like I use Calm, and I use the Waking Up apps, and I use the 5-minute journal that I talk about in Bright Spots and Landmines. And those little things seem to make a really big difference. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Perfect. Yeah. The other question is, we have lots of questions about teenagers and your eating ideas. As you know, I have a teenager, and eating is a difficult challenge, and then getting them to bolus for it is just as difficult. So do you have any tips for those teenagers on the call and for their parents that are trying not to be the circle of nagging?
Yes. Breakfast. Figure out breakfast. Make one meal of the day doable. Meaning like something the teenager will eat, something parent can make or provide, something that can be bolused for consistently or not bolused for. Just get breakfast down. And if there's one meal to make low carb, it's breakfast. So you can eat whatever you want, but let's make breakfast doable. Let's make breakfast low carb. That would be my tip.
And I think your idea around chunking is so huge with kids that age, just because they don't think long term. So if you can just get through breakfast, then you can get through the next thing.
Love that. Love that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. The other questions, and then I'll get to the ones in the chat, were really around setting expectations. How do you set yourself up every day to have the expectation that you'll do well, but if you don't do well, you don't beat yourself up? Like how can you put your feet on the ground and be like, what are the 3 things I should say in my brain today? Put my feet on the ground, that kind of set my expectations up so that I can have a successful day, however we define success that day.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's a deep question. Well, I think right now, given the times we're living in, I would just focus on one thing. Like, how can I have one more bright spot or one less landmine today? And yeah, I think there can be this temptation to like want to change like 800 things and then be so overwhelmed that nothing changes, or it's just like, well, I can't do all of that. And so whenever I notice that response in myself, it's like, how do I chunk this down to something I can do? So if I can't ride my bike for an hour, like, can I ride it for 20 minutes? If I can't do that, can I do 10 jumping jacks? And like, there is 5 minutes beats 0 minutes. Like that kind of works, I think, really well. Yeah, I've been using an app called Streaks. Streaks, and it allows you to just kind of set any habit that you want, and you just check in that day when you complete it. You just hold down your finger and it'll like complete the circle in a very satisfying way. And I just have two things in there right now. It's 5-minute journal and, 5 minutes of breathing in the morning, at least 5. And I've done it every day so far this year. And now I don't want to break the streak. So I want to keep my streak going. So it's 365 days. But I think what's key is it's only 2 things. And I know that they're doable because they each take 5 minutes or less. And the other thing I do is I put my headphones and my 5-minute journal right where I drink my tea in the morning. So it's in my environment, I have a immediate visual cue to do that thing. And then on my phone, I don't have any apps with the red badge except for streaks. So there's a big red badge staring me in my face when I haven't done those 2 things. And then I'm if I've forgotten for some reason in the morning, I'm still gonna get to them. So I don't know. I feel like your own behavior in psychology is a constant learning experience and experiment, and you are the lab investigator.
Absolutely. And for your children, you are too, which makes you a little crazy sometimes, just to be honest, in my own experience.
I hear you.
But so some of the questions that are here, so going back to food, there's lots of questions about recipes, which I think we've shared several of yours, but is there a go-to recipe place for you that you go to find low carb options?
Not really. There are a ton of, I think if you just Google low carb recipes, you'll get whatever the best site is out there. I tend to not, my partner is more of a recipe person than I am, but I did go on a buying spree of I'm going to buy low carb cookbooks and but they're so complicated and I just never opened the cookbooks. So I sort of defaulted more to let me just find 1 or 2 or 3 recipes that sort of fit the need that I have. So in the case of breakfast, it's I want some things besides chia pudding, for instance, that I can make for breakfast. So how do I make low carb pancakes, or how do I make low carb waffles, or low carb bread, or that tends to go pretty well. And then just finding things oh, do I have all these ingredients? Oh, I'm never going to buy that ingredient. Throw that recipe out. And yeah, so I wish I had a better answer. You could certainly buy the best-selling low-carb cookbooks on Amazon. I think they're good, but I just never end up using them. So,
right, absolutely. Let's see. What about pre-bolusing? Everyone talks a lot about pre-bolusing for every meal. I know on your Loop system it's a little bit different, but how do you feel about pre-bolusing, and how strongly do you stick with it?
Well, I think it depends on what you're eating. So I don't pre-bolus for anything I eat. I bolus right when I eat it, but that's because of the stuff that I eat is protein, fat, and mostly fiber. So there's no need. Pre-bolusing is about matching the rise in glucose to the insulin action, and matching those 2 curves more exactly. Because of the lag in insulin, when you take a bolus now, it's not going to start pulling glucose into your cells for at least 20 or 30 minutes. So if I eat I don't know, what's something really sugary, if I drink a Mountain Dew, that's raising my blood sugar in 2 minutes probably. So if I'm only bolusing now, I'm already 18 minutes behind. And so that's the reason to pre-bolus. So kind of my philosophy is I don't want to pre-bolus, so I'm just going to eat things that don't require me to pre-bolus. However, that probably doesn't work for teenagers. So I eat sushi once or twice a month, white rice, super fatty. It's a nightmare to bolus for. I get it right 0% of the time, but I will bolus for it. I will bolus for it when I'm walking home from the sushi place. So 40 minutes in advance. And I still don't manage it right. I'll either crash low or blast high, and this is with closed loop. So I just found that I got tired of trying to do these like time gymnastics around these foods, and I'd rather just like eat different foods that don't require it.
But I think it's good to hear everyone hear you say, but you still choose sushi twice a month because you like it. And that's how that works. And you just know that you're choosing that on that day, that you're going to ride the roller coaster with your sushi. So.
Yes. And I've had to still learn to like, I am just not going to get this one right. There's just no amount of experimenting that has yielded results, but I'm going to try to like minimize the damage. So I'm not going to eat this every day.
Right.
I'm not going to eat it even every week. And that's the way I sort of like, I can still eat sushi. It's a blood sugar disaster, but it'll be okay once a month.
Absolutely. Can you just explain the loop system you're on, and then we'll get to one more question and we'll wrap it up. But if you don't mind, just people are asking a lot about the system you're wearing, and I
wear the DIY loop system. So it's loopdocs.org, I think is the address. It's a not FDA approved system. Tidepool is making a commercial version of that system, which they plan to, which is under FDA review now, and they plan to put that on the App Store. So you could actually get a prescription, download it from the App Store, and use it with your a compatible pump and CGM. So I'm on the like pre-version that's not FDA approved and that you have to kind of build yourself, which you can read about how to do that online.
Perfect. So last question of the night is, and I think this is a loaded question, so I'm glad you asked it. Do you have a target A1C that you're looking for, or do you just look for your time in range?
I don't care about my A1C. It's an unimportant metric. And the reason is because it's a 3-month average of a disease that changes every 5 minutes. So I don't really care about what my 3-month, it's like, just think about anything. Like if you wanted to improve being a trumpet player and you got a 3-month average of your, performance, like, would that help you at all? Or, so I feel like it's probably not a good analogy, but I use CGM because it's an every 5-minute measure of my diabetes, and it tells me metrics are only useful if they tell me like what to change or what I could do different. And an A1C of 6 could mean 5 different things. It could mean that I'm low 38% of the day, and then I'm high the other 60% of the day, and I just happen to hit an A1C that's 6, but I'm miserable. So I focus on time in range and time in hypo, and I try to have a time in range above 70% and a time in hypo below 4. And those are like the clinical recommendations for time in range. And then I'm also really interested in like, what are my patterns? Like, when am I consistently high and consistently low? And what is there anything to learn from those? To me, like, CGM gives you everything that A1C does and like 8,000 more great things that are really, really helpful. And so I think the unfortunate thing is like doctors and insurance companies are still living in the 1990s when A1C became the thing. And it's just going to take like another 10 years to have like CGM be the way that we measure quality of diabetes management. So the time in range was 70% or more in the 70 to 180 and less than 4% below 70. That's kind of the clinically recommended ranges. And I think if you're at 60, don't beat yourself up. Like, if you can get to 65, wonderful. Or if you can get to 70, that's great. But, I think the data around complications, if you're at a time in range of like 30, 20, 45, like that's kind of higher risk. But if you're at a time in range of 70, I think you're managing diabetes well enough. And that's all we can ask.
I'm with you. Any final thought, Adam? Otherwise, we will say thank you so much.
Oh, thank you all for coming and staying on Zoom. I know it's a lot of screen time these days. I'm honored that folks would want to hear what I have to say. Yeah, I hope this was useful, and we'll send the slides out. I will, if there are other questions, like maybe I'll answer them in some kind of diatribe column or something. Yeah, so please be in touch. You can email me at brightspots@diatribe.org. And yeah.
And I will send out a follow-up tomorrow with a lot of the hints and tricks and websites and apps and all the things that you mentioned. So everyone will get that tomorrow. And thank you all so much. And thank you, Adam. This was amazing and super helpful. And I know really insightful for lots of people. So we appreciate your time this evening. And I hope all of you have a great night. Thanks all.